CEO met X by chance in hospital, saw the boy beside her. He finally knew. He became dad in tears. Hello, my beautiful story family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Yesterday was such a special day. It was my birthday. I had an amazing celebration, but I couldn't stop thinking about all of you. Your heartfelt birthday wishes truly made my day unforgettable. I'm so grateful to have you in my life. You're more than an audience. You're family. Oh, how I wish we could have shared my birthday cake together. Just imagine all of us celebrating, laughing, and making memories. It would have been magical. Before we dive into today's story, tell me, did you enjoy the last one? If you loved it, drop a big yes in the comments below. Now let's get started. Power had a distinct feeling. Malric Lucien knew this better than most as he strode through the gleaming corridors of Mount Sinai Hospital, each click of his handcrafted Oxford shoes against marble floors, echoing his authority. At 35, he'd become the youngest CEO in Lucien Pharmaceuticals' history, transforming his grandfather's modest company into a billion-dollar empire. Today's hospital visit was meant to be another carefully orchestrated publicity move, a powerful man showing his benevolent side to the cameras. The morning light filtered through vast windows, casting long shadows across the pediatric wing's walls, decorated with cheerful murals of jungle animals. Malric adjusted his Patek Philippe watch, a habit he'd developed during high-stakes negotiations. These hospital visits usually bored him, necessary performances for shareholders and the press. But something felt different today, an inexplicable heaviness in the air that made the fine hairs on the back of his neck rise. Mr. Lucien, the children's ward is thrilled about the new therapy equipment. Dr. Harrison rambled beside him, struggling to match Malric's long strides. The donation will... Malric raised his hand, silencing the doctor mid-sentence. There, at the end of the corridor, time seemed to fold in on itself. A familiar laugh, melodic, warm, unchanged by the years, floated through the air. His heart, trained to maintain its steady rhythm through million-dollar deals and corporate takeovers, stumbled. Serafina Renzo stood by the nurse's station, her copper-gold curls catching the morning light. She'd cut them short, the waves now brushing her shoulders instead of cascading down her back as they had 5 years ago. Her white doctor's coat couldn't hide the elegant posture that had first caught his attention across a crowded boardroom. But it was her smile, that brilliant, unguarded smile he'd once lived to earn, directed not at him, but at a small boy holding her hand. The child couldn't have been more than 4. He had Serafina's delicate nose, but those eyes, Malric felt the ground tilt beneath his feet. He knew those eyes. They were his own, the same stormy grey that stared back at him from childhood photos displayed in his penthouse office. The boy's dark curls, too, mirrored the untamed mop he'd sported before corporate life demanded careful grooming. "Mommy, look!" The boy's voice carried down the corridor as he held up a drawing. "Dr. Kaya said I'm the best artist she's ever had." Malric watched, frozen, as a striking black woman in teal scrubs appeared beside them. Dr. Kaya Morrison. He recognized her from the hospital's promotional materials. She caught his eye over Serafina's shoulder, and something in her expression told him she knew exactly who he was. Her protective shift closer to Serafina and the boy spoke volumes. The world narrowed to this single moment. 5 years of questions crystallized into devastating clarity. Serafina's sudden disappearance, the cryptic note left on his desk, the way she'd touched her stomach during their last dinner together, a gesture he'd been too preoccupied with quarterly reports to notice. The timing aligned perfectly with their final night together, when she'd tried to warn him about irregularities in the company's drug trials, concerns he'd dismissed as paranoia. "Adrian, sweetheart, we should let Dr. Kaya get back to her other patients. Serafina was saying, her voice still carrying that hint of Boston Brahmin refinement she'd tried so hard to soften. Adrian. His son's name was Adrian. The boy's laughter echoed through the corridor again, and something cracked in Malric's carefully constructed world. This was what real power felt like. Not the artificial authority of corporate boardrooms, but the earth-shattering force of discovering you've been a father for years without knowing it. Dr. Harrison cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mr. Lucian, the press is waiting in the conference room." But Malric barely heard him. 5 years of international expansion, hostile takeovers, and record-breaking profit suddenly felt hollow. He'd built an empire of glass and steel while somewhere in this same city his son had taken his first steps, spoken his first words, drawn his first picture, all without him. Serafina turned, perhaps sensing his presence. Their eyes met across the space that seemed both infinite and microscopic. The color drained from her face, her hand tightening protectively around Adrian's. In that moment, Malric saw not the brilliant research director who challenged him in boardroom debates, but a mother prepared to fight the world to protect her child. Their child. Kaya moved smoothly between them, her dark eyes full of warning and wisdom. "Dr. Renzo," she said clearly, emphasizing the professional title, "your next patient is ready in room 304. But it was too late for protective interventions. Adrian had noticed him, those familiar grey eyes widening with childhood curiosity. The boy tugged at his mother's hand, pointing. "Mommy, that man looks like the picture in your box!" The words hit Malric like a physical blow. She'd kept pictures of him. Had she shown them to Adrian, told him anything about his father? The questions crowded his throat, fighting to break free. Serafina recovered first, her professional mask sliding into place, the same one she'd worn during tense board meetings lifetime ago. "Come on, sweetheart," she murmured to Adrian, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "We don't want to keep Mrs. Chen waiting." They moved to pass him, Serafina's heels clicking against the floor in a rhythm that echoed the pounding of his heart. As they drew level, time seemed to slow. Adrian looked up at him with innocent curiosity, a small dimple appearing in his cheek as he smiled, another inherited trait that struck Malric like lightning. "I like your tie," the boy said simply. "It's the same color as my favorite crayon." The words, so innocent and unknowingly profound, shattered something deep inside Malric's chest. He had a son who measured the world in crayon colors, who saw him not as a powerful CEO or a stranger who'd missed 5 years of his life, but simply as a man with a nice tie. Before he could respond, they were past him, Serafina's pace just short of running. Kaya lingered for a moment, her expression complex. "Some truths," she said quietly, "cost more than others." Then she too was gone, leaving Malric standing in the corridor with the weight of revelation pressing against his chest. The cameras waiting in the conference room couldn't capture the real story unfolding in Mount Sinai that day. They wouldn't see how Malric Lucien, the ruthless CEO known for his unshakable composure, had to brace himself against the wall once he was alone. They wouldn't photograph the moment he pulled out his phone with trembling fingers and cancelled every meeting for the next week. And they certainly wouldn't document how he sat in his parked Bentley for hours afterward, staring at an old photo of Serafina on his phone while learning what it felt like to grieve for years you could never get back. The morning sun climbed higher over Manhattan, painting the hospital windows in sheets of gold. Inside, a small boy showed his mother another drawing, unaware that his innocent existence had just reshapen the world. And somewhere between the pediatric wing and the parking garage, a man who'd spent his life accumulating power finally understood that true wealth had nothing to do with money at all. Chapter 2. Echoes of the Past. The penthouse suite of the Lucien Tower stood 60 stories above Manhattan, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a god's-eye view of the city below. But Malric barely noticed the golden sunset painting the skyline. Instead, his attention was fixed on the manila folder spread across his desk, personnel files he hadn't touched in 5 years. Dr. Serafina Renzo's company ID photo stared back at him. Even in the clinical corporate headshot, her amber eyes held that characteristic intensity, challenging anyone who dared underestimate her. Her credentials were impeccable: double PhD from MIT, breakthrough research in molecular pharmaceuticals, the youngest research director in the company's history. But it was the dates that now burned into his consciousness. Her last day of employment exactly matched the early stages of a pregnancy that would have given him a son. He pulled out his phone, opening the private investigator's preliminary report delivered hours earlier. Serafina had rebuilt her life methodically after leaving. A position at Mount Sinai's research department, a modest apartment in Greenwich Village, regular donations to children's medical charities. Adrian's birth certificate listed no father. The boy's full name was Adrian Thomas Renzo. Thomas had been Malric's father's name, a detail that made his throat tight. She'd given their son his grandfather's name even while keeping his existence a secret. The scotch in his crystal tumbler remained untouched as memories flooded back. Their first meeting had been explosive. She'd torn apart his proposal for a new drug trial timeline in front of the entire board, her brilliant mind finding flaws his best analysts had missed. He'd promoted her on the spot, recognizing talent that could revolutionize the company. The attraction had been immediate, electric, but they'd both fought it, aware of the complications, until that night in Paris. They'd been there for a pharmaceutical conference, the city's romantic atmosphere wearing down their professional barriers. He could still feel the rain on his face as they'd run laughing across the Pont des Arts, could still taste the wine on her lips during their first kiss beneath the golden lights of the bridge. Everything had seemed possible then, before the weight of corporate politics and family legacy had crushed their dreams. His intercom buzzed, jarring him from the memories. "Mr. Lucien, Vincent Stone is here to see you." Malric's jaw tightened. His mentor and board chairman always had impeccable timing. "Send him in." Vincent entered with his usual commanding presence, his silver hair and tailored suit projecting the old money authority that had guided Lucien Pharmaceuticals through decades of growth. Burning the midnight oil, his sharp eyes took in the scattered files. Interesting choice of reading material. "Just reviewing some historical data," Malric replied carefully, but Vincent's slight smile suggested he wasn't fooled. "I heard about your hospital visit today." Vincent settled into a leather chair, every movement deliberate. "Quite the surprise, running into our former research director and her situation." The way he emphasized the last word made Malric's spine stiffen. "You knew?" It wasn't a question. "About Dr. Renzo's departure?" "Of course. The board felt it was best to handle the situation quietly, given the circumstances." "The circumstances being my child?" Malric's voice could have frozen hell itself. Vincent's expression remained maddeningly calm. "The circumstances being a brilliant but misguided young woman making accusations about our testing protocols, accusations that could have destroyed everything your grandfather built. She chose to leave, Malric. We simply facilitated her decision." The scotch glass shattered in Malric's grip, amber liquid seeping into scattered papers. Vincent didn't flinch. "What did you do?" Malric's words came out as a growl. "Protected the company, protected you." Vincent stood, brushing invisible lint from his sleeve. "Doctor, Renzo was investigating certain aggressive clinical trials. Her pregnancy made her emotional, paranoid. She was seeing conspiracies where there were only standard business practices." Malric's mind raced back to their last night together. Serafina had been agitated, trying to show him something on her laptop. But he'd been distracted by quarterly reports, dismissing her concerns as stress from their secret relationship. The next morning, she was gone, leaving only a note. Some prices are too high to pay. If you threatened her, please. Vincent's smile was razor-sharp. We merely showed her evidence of insider trading that implicated her directly. Of course, the evidence was circumstantial, but pregnancy discrimination suits are so messy, she made the wise choice to resign quietly. The truth hit Malric like a physical blow. They'd framed her, used her relationship with him to create a paper trail that could destroy her career. And he, blinded by ambition and trust in his mentor, had let it happen. She found something, didn't she? Malric's voice was deadly quiet. Something in those trial results that could have exposed the board. Ancient history. Vincent moved toward the door, then paused. A word of advice, my boy. Let sleeping dogs lie. Focus on the company's future, not its past. Some truths are better left buried. After Vincent left, Malric stood at his window, watching night claim the city. The same view he'd shared with Serafina countless times, planning their future while she'd traced equations on the glass with her finger. Brilliant mind, always working. How many other lies had been built into the foundation of his success? His phone buzzed, another update from the investigator. Adrian had won his school's science fair last month with a project on molecular structures, like mother, like son. The boy was already showing signs of their shared brilliance, all while Malric had been sitting in this tower, blind to the biggest truth in his life. He opened his laptop, accessing files he hadn't looked at in years. Serafina's research notes, testing data, trial results. Somewhere in these numbers lay the reason she'd chosen to flee rather than fight. This time, he'd read every line, see every detail he'd been too proud to notice before. Dawn was breaking when his private line rang. The number was unlisted, but he knew who it would be. He has your father's smile. Kaya's voice was soft, but firm. And your stubbornness. He deserves to know you, but if you approach this wrong, if you hurt them, I won't, Malric promised, his voice raw from hours of silence. Help me fix this. The pause stretched long enough that he thought she'd hung up. Finally, come to my office tomorrow morning. No lawyers, no corporate armor, just you, ready to hear some hard truths. He agreed, then spent an hour staring at an old photo on his phone. It was from that night in Paris, Serafina laughing as she tried to teach him basic molecular chemistry on a cafe napkin. She'd drawn a complex structure, explaining how changing one tiny element could transform the entire compound. One choice, one moment of blindness, had transformed his entire life. Now, looking at reports of his son's achievements, at the careful life Serafina had built from the ashes of their relationship, Malric finally understood what real power was. Not the ability to control others, but the strength to face your own failures and fight to make them right. The sun rose over Manhattan, painting his empire in shades of gold and shadow. Somewhere in this city, his son was probably waking up, perhaps drawing more pictures, asking questions about the world, with Serafina's insatiable curiosity and his own stormy eyes. Malric touched the glass, a gesture echoing years of memories. This time, he wouldn't look away from the truth, no matter how much it hurt. This time, he'd be worthy of those grey eyes that had looked up at him with innocent admiration, seeing not the powerful CEO or the man who'd failed their mother, but simply someone wearing a tie the colour of a favourite crayon. Vincent's warning echoed in his mind, some truths are better left buried. But as Malric gathered the scattered files and research that would help him uncover the real reason behind Serafina's departure, he knew that the only truth that mattered was the one he'd seen in his son's smile. Everything else, his empire, his power, his carefully constructed world of glass and steel, was nothing compared to the chance to finally become the father that Adrian deserved. Chapter 3. The Other Woman. Dr. Kaya Morrison's office in Mount Sinai's Pediatric Oncology Wing told the story of a life dedicated to healing. Photos of smiling children lined the walls, survivors, fighters, precious lives saved through her pioneering treatments. But it was the picture on her desk, partially hidden behind medical journals, that captured her attention now. Serafina and Adrian at his 4th birthday party, both laughing as they attempted to build a molecularly accurate cake. The memory of that day tightened Kaya's throat. She'd been there when Adrian took his first breath, had held Serafina's hand through 26 hours of labor while her friend refused an epidural, determined to feel every moment. She'd watched this little family grow from the ashes of corporate betrayal, seen how Serafina transformed from a broken woman into a fierce mother who would move heaven and earth for her son. And now, at 7 a.m. on a crisp autumn morning, Kaya waited for the man who had unknowingly set it all in motion. Malric Lucien arrived exactly on time, but not in his usual corporate armor. The expensive suit was replaced by a cashmere sweater and tailored slacks, an attempt at approachability that might have worked if not for the tension radiating from his powerful frame. He'd clearly not slept, dark circles beneath those infamous grey eyes that his son had inherited. Dr. Morrison. He extended his hand, then hesitated when she didn't immediately take it. "Thank you for—" "Sit." Kaya's tone left no room for corporate pleasantries. She'd faced down hospital boards and insurance companies. This man didn't intimidate her. "Before we begin, understand something. I'm not your employee or your subordinate. I'm here because a 4-year-old boy who loves dinosaurs and quantum physics deserves to know his father. But if you're here to throw money at the situation or strong-arm your way into their lives, this conversation ends now." Something flickered in Malric's eyes, respect perhaps, or recognition of a force equal to his own. He sat, his usual commanding presence tempered by exhaustion and humility. "I spent all night reviewing old research files. There are inconsistencies in the trial data, gaps that—" "Stop!" Kaya pulled out a thick manila folder. "You want to talk numbers and trials? Fine, but first you're going to look at what you missed." She spread photos across her desk like playing cards. Adrian's first steps, captured in the hospital corridor where Serafina worked endless hours to rebuild her career. His 2nd birthday, spent in this very office because a young patient needed emergency treatment and Serafina refused to leave her post. School plays, science fairs, quiet moments of mother and son bent over books far beyond his age level. 5 years of memories, Kaya said quietly. 5 years of triumphs and tears and midnight fevers. 5 years of him asking about the man in the pictures his mother keeps hidden but can't bear to throw away. Malric's hands shook as he reached for a photo of Adrian in oversized safety goggles, proudly displaying a simple chemistry experiment. "He's brilliant." "He's extraordinary," Kaya corrected, "and terrified of thunderstorms. He sleeps with a stuffed penguin named Tesla. He can recite the periodic table, but still can't tie his shoes. He asks questions that would stump PhD candidates, then turns around and worries if Santa's reindeer get enough breaks on Christmas Eve." She watched Malric absorb each detail like a man dying of thirst. "The night Serafina came to me, she was barely holding herself together, 7 weeks pregnant, career in shambles, and carrying evidence that could have brought down half the pharmaceutical industry. Your board hadn't just buried failed trial results, they'd actively falsified data, rushing drugs to market without proper safety protocols." "Vincent," Malric breathed, pieces clicking into place. "Among others, they'd created shell companies to hide the real test results, used desperate patients as unofficial trial subjects. Serafina found the pattern, but by then she was already pregnant. When she tried to bring it to you—" "I was too busy," he finished, self-loathing thick in his voice, too focused on quarterly reports and market expansions. They threatened her career, her future, her baby's future. Vincent Stone made it clear that if she went public, she'd never work in medicine again. They had enough fabricated evidence to paint her as an unstable woman trying to damage the company out of spite. Kaya's dark eyes flashed, but it was when they implied they could make her pregnancy complicated that she ran. Malric's face went ash-white. They wouldn't have. 2 research assistants who'd helped collect the original trial data died in accidents that year. Still want to finish that sentence. Silence filled the office, broken only by the distant sounds of the hospital coming to life. Finally, Malric spoke, his voice raw. "Why are you telling me this now? Why help me at all?" Kaya stood, moving to her window that overlooked the hospital's children's garden. "Because last week, Adrian asked me why his daddy didn't love him enough to look for him. Because Serafina still flinches every time your company's name appears in the news. Because I've spent 5 years watching 2 brilliant people try to rebuild their lives around a hole that shouldn't exist." She turned back to him, her gaze unflinching. "But mostly because last night Serafina called me in tears, terrified you'll try to take him from her through the courts. She'd run again, you know. Disappear so completely you'd never find them, and this time I'd help her do it." "I would never—" Malric started, but Kaya raised her hand. "Intentions aren't enough. That little boy has enough abandonment fears to keep therapists employed through college. Serafina has enough trust issues to fill a psychology textbook. You want to be part of their lives? Prove you deserve it, not with money or lawyers or corporate power plays. Prove you can be the father Adrian needs, the man Serafina once believed you could be." She pulled one final photo from her desk drawer. Adrian asleep in the hospital reading Nook, advanced physics book open on his lap. He has your mind, your drive to understand how things work, but he has Serafina's heart, her capacity to care about the why behind the how. Don't make him choose between those halves of himself. Malric stared at the photo, touching it with a gentleness few would believe him capable of. "Where do I start?" "By listening." Kaya handed him a small notebook. "I've kept records of every major moment in Adrian's life. His favorite foods, his fears, his proudest achievements. Read it. Learn who your son is before you try to change his world." She moved to her office door, signaling the end of their meeting. "One more thing. The evidence Serafina gathered, it still exists. She wasn't just protecting Adrian when she ran, she was protecting you too. Vincent would have destroyed you if you'd tried to expose him then. Make sure you're ready for the storm that's coming when you do it now." Malric stood, clutching the notebook like a lifeline. "Thank you, Dr. Morrison, for everything you've done for them." "Don't thank me yet." Her smile held equal parts warning and hope. Earning trust back is harder than earning it the first time. But watching you yesterday, seeing how Adrian's simple words about your tie shattered your corporate mask, maybe there's hope for you yet. After he left, Kaya sank into her chair, emotionally drained. Her phone buzzed. A text from Serafina. "He's asking about him." What do I say? Kaya looked at the morning sun painting Manhattan in shades of possibility, then at the photos spread across her desk. So many precious moments captured and preserved. Perhaps it was time to start a new album. "Tell him the truth," she typed back. "His father has been lost for a very long time, but sometimes the best stories start when someone finally finds their way home." Chapter 4. Truth's Bitter Medicine. The hospital's research library after midnight was a sanctuary of shadows and silence, broken only by the gentle hum of computers and the whisper of rain against towering windows. Serafina Renzo sat surrounded by stacks of old journals, her copper curls falling forward as she buried herself in work, a habit that hadn't changed in 5 years. Science had always been her refuge, numbers and molecules never lying like people did. She sensed his presence before she heard him, the same way she used to feel electricity in the air before summer storms. Malric's reflection appeared in her computer screen, a ghost made flesh by fluorescent lights and rain-streaked windows. I wondered how long it would take you to find me here. Her voice was steady despite her racing heart. She'd known this confrontation was inevitable after Kaya told her about their morning meeting, but that didn't make it easier. You always did your best thinking at night. Malric moved into the light, and Serafina noticed he'd loosened his tie, the same blue one Adrian had admired. The building would be empty, but your office lights would still be on, equations covering every whiteboard. That was another life. She turned, finally facing him directly. The years had added silver threads at his temples, lines around his eyes that spoke of burden rather than joy. "Why are you here, Malric?" He placed a familiar, leather-bound notebook on her desk, her research journal from 5 years ago. "Because I finally read every word, every trial report, every data anomaly, every warning you tried to give me, and I need to know the rest." Serafina's hands trembled as she touched the notebook. "Where did you—" "It was in the company archives, misfiled under routine testing data. Vincent's people weren't as thorough as they thought." His voice hardened on his mentor's name. "You found something in the Prometheus trials, didn't you? Something beyond the falsified data?" The old fear crept up her spine, but she forced it down. She wasn't that frightened young researcher anymore, running to protect an unborn child. She was a mother now, stronger than steel when it came to protecting her son. "Page 394, she said quietly. "Third paragraph." Malric opened the notebook with careful fingers, finding the page she'd memorized through years of nightmares. His grey eyes, Adrian's eyes, widened as he read. "Jesus Christ," he breathed. They knew. Before the trials even started, they knew the drug could cause genetic damage in children whose parents had been exposed. But they buried it, pushed it through anyway. 12 children. Serafina's voice cracked. 12 babies born with devastating mutations because their parents had been part of those unofficial trials, trials that never officially existed, conducted through shell companies and desperate doctors in developing countries. She pressed her hand to her stomach, an unconscious echo of old fears. "When I found out I was pregnant, you thought our child might be affected." The realization hit him like physical pain. "Because you'd been working with the trial samples. I hadn't been directly exposed, but I couldn't be sure. And when I tried to tell you, to show you the evidence, I was too busy." The self-loathing in his voice was raw, too focused on the goddamn merger to listen. "Vincent came to me the next day." Serafina stood, needing to move, to breathe through memories that still had the power to suffocate. "He had a file, evidence of insider trading, emails that made it look like I'd been selling company secrets, all fabricated, but good enough to destroy my career, good enough to start a criminal investigation that would follow me forever." She walked to the windows, watching rain trace patterns like tears down the glass. "He said if I went public with the trial data, they'd bury me so deep I'd never work in medicine again. Said stress like that could be dangerous for a pregnancy." Her laugh was bitter. "He offered me a choice, disappear quietly with enough money to start over, or fight and lose everything, including my baby's future. Why didn't you tell me you were pregnant?" The question that had haunted him for days finally escaped. "I would have protected you both." "Would you?" She turned back to him, amber eyes fierce. "The man you were then, so desperate to prove yourself worthy of the Lucian legacy. Would you have believed me over Vincent?" Over the board members who'd mentored you since your father died. I was just the brilliant girl from the wrong side of the tracks who'd climbed too high, too fast. They made sure to remind me of that. The truth of her words hit him like bullets. He'd been so caught up in becoming the perfect CEO, he'd lost sight of what really mattered. Adrian, he's perfectly healthy. Her voice softened, understanding his fear. I had every genetic test done during the pregnancy, then more after he was born. He's brilliant, Malric. So brilliant it takes my breath away sometimes. Last week he asked me to explain quantum entanglement while we made pancakes. A smile ghosted across Malric's face. Kaya showed me his science fair project. Molecular structures at 4 years old. He gets that from both of us. Serafina's throat tightened. He has your focus when he's solving a problem, the way nothing else exists until he figures it out. But he has my need to understand the human side of science. He doesn't just want to know how things work, but how they affect people. He asked about my tie. The words came out rough with emotion. Such a small thing, but it shattered you. She nodded. That's who he is. He sees people, really sees them. Last month he gave his favorite dinosaur book to a crying kid in the cancer ward, then spent 2 hours teaching him all the long names. Her eyes filled with tears. He's the best of both of us, Malric. Everything good we could have been if the world hadn't gotten in the way. Malric moved closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in her eyes that had once fascinated him during late-night research sessions. I'm not that blind, ambitious fool anymore, Serafina. I've spent the past 2 days dismantling every piece of my life, looking for the truth I missed. The evidence you gathered, it could destroy everything Vincent built, everything I inherited. It could also help those families. She met his gaze steadily. The ones whose children paid the price for corporate greed. They deserve justice, Malric. They deserve to know why. Help me make it right. He held out his hand, not touching her, but offering something more important. Partnership. Not for the company, not for me, but for them, for Adrian. Show him that sometimes the truth is worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Serafina looked at his outstretched hand, remembering other promises, other moments of trust that had shattered. But she also remembered their son's face that morning, asking once again about the man in the pictures she kept hidden away. I kept everything, she whispered. Every document, every trial result, every piece of evidence. I couldn't destroy it. The truth was all I had left of us. All I had to give Adrian someday to explain why his father wasn't there. I'm here now. Malric's voice was gentle but firm. And I'm not leaving again, no matter what storms come. She took a deep breath, then reached for her laptop. There's a hidden server secured with quantum encryption. Everything's there, waiting. But Malric... She met his eyes. If we do this, if we expose them, they'll burn your world to the ground. His smile was wolf-fierce in the darkness. Let them try. I'm not fighting for my world anymore. I'm fighting for his. For the chance to be worthy of that little boy who likes my tie and asks about quantum physics over pancakes. Outside, the rain fell harder, washing away old sins, as two brilliant minds bent over a laptop screen, piecing together the truth that had torn them apart. In a peaceful bedroom across the city, their son slept soundly, dreaming of molecules and dinosaurs, unaware that his parents were rewriting their story. Not for power or revenge, but for the chance to show him that some bonds were stronger than fear, some truths worth every sacrifice. And in the shadowy corners of Lucian Tower, Vincent Stone's phone buzzed with an urgent alert. Someone had accessed the buried files of Project Prometheus. The game he thought he'd won 5 years ago was about to begin again. But this time, the players had everything to fight for and nothing left to lose. Chapter 5. Shadows of Conspiracy. The private elevator to the Lucian Tower's secured archives required both a biometric scan and an executive keycard. As Malric descended 50 floors below Manhattan's streets, he remembered his grandfather's words. "The truth about power isn't in boardrooms, son. It's in what we keep buried." The irony wasn't lost on him now. The archives stretched like a labyrinth of corporate secrets, temperature-controlled rooms protecting decades of research behind bulletproof glass. His footsteps echoed as he made his way to Section P, where Project Prometheus had been officially terminated 5 years ago, the same week Serafina disappeared. His phone buzzed, a text from Kaya. "Adrian asked about you again today. He wants to know if you like quantum physics too." The simple message made his hands shake as he unlocked the secure room. His son was out there, brilliant and curious, while he was down here unearthing the rot that had cost them 5 years together. The room's lights flickered on automatically, illuminating walls of files that shouldn't exist. "I had a feeling I'd find you here." Malric spun to find Jessica Chen, his grandfather's former secretary and the archive's keeper, watching him from the doorway. Her silver hair was still pulled into an immaculate bun, her eyes sharp despite her age. "Ms. Chen," he kept his voice neutral, "I didn't realize anyone else had clearance for this level." "I've been keeping these records since before you were born, Mr. Lucian." She moved into the room with surprising grace, including the ones Vincent thinks he destroyed. Understanding dawned. "You knew about Serafina, about the trials." "I knew many things." She pulled a key from around her neck. "Your grandfather wasn't a perfect man, but he believed in leaving breadcrumbs. Ways to find the truth, if someone was brave enough to look." She unlocked a hidden panel in the wall, revealing a safe he'd never noticed. "The question is, are you ready to see how deep this goes?" The safe contained a single USB drive and a letter in his grandfather's handwriting, dated 2 weeks before his death. Malric's hands trembled as he unfolded the paper. "My boy, if you're reading this, you've finally started asking the right questions. Vincent was my friend once, but power corrupts, and he chose profit over people long ago. The evidence on this drive will show you everything, not just about Prometheus, but about all of it. The shell companies, the buried trials, the deaths made to look like accidents. I tried to stop it quietly, to protect the company's legacy. That was my mistake. The legacy that matters isn't in stock prices or market shares. It's in the lives we touch, the truth we choose to tell. I'm sorry I won't be there to help you fight this battle. But remember, a Lucian's true strength isn't in what he builds, but in what he's willing to tear down to make things right. All my love, grandfather." He knew. Malric's voice cracked. All this time. He was gathering evidence when the stroke hit. Jessica's eyes held old grief. "Vincent visited him in the hospital that night, alone. The next morning, your grandfather was dead." The implications hit like physical blows. "You think Vincent. I think power makes men capable of anything." She touched the USB drive. "Your grandfather left this in my care with instructions to wait until you were ready. When I saw Dr. Renzo's name in the visitor logs yesterday, I knew it was time." Malric plugged the drive into his tablet with unsteady hands. Files populated the screen, hundreds of them meticulously organized, financial records showing money funneled through offshore accounts, email chains discussing problem containment when test subjects showed adverse reactions, security footage from labs that officially didn't exist, and then he found it, a video file dated the night before Serafina fled. The footage showed Vincent in his office speaking to a man Malric recognized as former head of security. "Make sure she understands the stakes," Vincent was saying. "If she won't take the settlement, there are other ways to handle pregnancy complications. Natural-looking ways." Bile rose in Malric's throat, the casual way they'd discussed harming Serafina, his child. "There's more." Jessica pulled up another file. The original Prometheus trial data, The drug didn't just cause mutations in children of test subjects. They knew it could affect genetic material for generations. Any child born to anyone exposed, even indirectly. Adrian. Cold fear gripped him. Serafina worked with those samples. Your grandfather ordered independent testing when he discovered the truth. Dr. Renzo's exposure levels were minimal, but Vincent buried the results. She ran before they could tell her she and the baby were safe. Jessica's voice softened. She chose protecting your child over everything else, her career, her reputation, her heart. Malric sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the weight of truth. All these years I blamed her for leaving. Told myself she'd chosen ambition over us, but she was protecting our son while I was too blind to see the snakes in my own garden. The question is, Jessica said quietly, what will you do now? He looked at his phone, at Kaya's text about Adrian's curiosity. Then, at his grandfather's letter, the words burning into his consciousness. Lucian's true strength isn't in what he builds, but in what he's willing to tear down to make things right. How many other families were affected? His voice was steel. How many children? 17 confirmed cases in the official trials, but the unofficial tests in overseas clinics. We may never know the true number. Malric stood, decision crystallizing. Download everything, every file, every record, every piece of evidence. Then call Benjamin Hayes at the Justice Department. It's time he knew what his old friend Vincent has really been doing. Vincent has powerful allies, Jessica warned. People who've profited from his secrets for decades. They'll destroy you. Let them try. Malric's smile was dangerous. I'm not fighting for profit anymore. I'm fighting for a little boy who loves quantum physics and dinosaurs. For his mother, who gave up everything to protect him. For all the families who deserve to know why their children paid the price for corporate greed. His phone buzzed again, a photo from Kaya. Adrian in his school science lab, proudly holding up a project on molecular bonds. The same fierce intelligence Malric saw in the mirror every morning, the same determination he'd inherited from his grandfather. Miss Chen, he said quietly, how would you feel about being interviewed by federal prosecutors? Her answering smile was sharp as a scalpel. I've been keeping receipts for 40 years, Mr. Lucien. It's about time someone actually read them. They worked through the night, building an airtight case from decades of buried secrets. Every document, every video, every trace of corruption laid bare. When dawn painted the archive windows with gold, Malric sent 2 messages. To Serafina. The truth was never buried, just waiting for someone brave enough to dig. To Vincent. His letter of resignation as CEO, effective immediately, copied to the board and major shareholders. The old man's response was immediate. You're throwing away everything we built. Malric's reply was simple. No, I'm choosing what actually matters. Later that morning, as federal agents swarmed Lucian Tower with warrants, Malric sat in his car outside Adrian's school. He watched children pour through the gates, looking for a mop of dark curls and storm-grey eyes. A boy who asked about quantum physics and noticed the color of strangers' ties. His phone rang. Benjamin Hayes from Justice. It's bigger than we thought, Malric. The paper trail goes back decades. This could take down half the pharmaceutical industry. Good. Malric watched Adrian emerge, clutching a science book nearly as big as he was. Some things need to fall before we can rebuild them right. He ended the call, heart pounding as his son's eyes found him. For a moment they simply looked at each other, the boy who loved science and the father who'd finally learned what was worth fighting for. Adrian smiled, that same dimple appearing that Malric saw in old photos of himself. And in that moment, as his empire crumbled around him, Malric Lucien finally understood what real power felt like. It felt like hope. Chapter 6. The Price of Protection. The children's garden at Mount Sinai bloomed improbably in the October chill, a sanctuary of resilience amid the sterile hospital walls. Kaya Morrison sat on her favorite bench, watching Adrian chase falling leaves with the boundless energy of childhood. From this angle, his resemblance to Malric was striking. The same determined set of his jaw, the same intensity of focus. "He's going to crash hard tonight," Serafina said, settling beside her friend. She looked exhausted, but somehow lighter, as if sharing the truth with Malric had lifted a physical weight. 3 hours of quantum physics homework, then leaf classification. He's running on pure curiosity at this point. Like mother, like son. Kaya smiled, remembering countless nights of finding Serafina asleep in the hospital library, research papers scattered around her. Though that stubbornness is all Lucienne. They watched Adrian carefully arrange leaves by color and size, his small face scrunched in concentration. A cool breeze carried the scent of approaching rain, and Kaya pulled her cardigan closer, remembering another autumn day 5 years ago. "You never asked me why I helped you," she said quietly. "That night you showed up at my door, pregnant and terrified." Serafina turned, studying her friend's face. "I always assumed it was because you're a good person, because you saw someone in trouble and reached out." It was more than that. Kaya's dark eyes held old shadows. 15 years ago, I was a resident at Boston Children's Hospital. We had a patient, 7 years old, terminal cancer. Her parents were desperate, willing to try anything. A pharmaceutical company approached them about an experimental treatment, off the books. They promised miracles. Understanding dawned in Serafina's eyes. Lucian Pharmaceuticals, one of their shell companies. The treatment, it was torture. That little girl suffered for months before she died. When I tried to report it, to expose what they'd done, Kaya's hands clenched. They buried everything, made it look like standard palliative care gone wrong. Her parents never knew the truth. "That's why you became head of pediatric oncology," Serafina breathed. "Why you're so passionate about ethical trials. I swore I'd never let it happen again. Then you walked into my ER for your first prenatal checkup, and I saw the name on your insurance card, Lucian Pharmaceuticals. You were glowing, talking about groundbreaking research and the brilliant CEO you'd fallen in love with." A sad smile crossed Kaya's face. "I almost warned you that day, but you were so happy, so sure that science and love could conquer anything. And then I found the Prometheus files," Serafina's voice cracked, "saw what they were willing to do for profit. When you came to me that night, showing me the evidence, telling me you were pregnant, I knew I couldn't fail another child, another mother." Kaya reached for her friend's hand. "I didn't just help you hide. I helped you build a fortress. Every medical record, every paper trail, encrypted and secured. I made sure Adrian would have the best prenatal care without leaving electronic footprints." "You were my guardian angel." Serafina squeezed her hand. "Through the morning sickness, the complications, those endless hours of labor." 26 hours, Kaya laughed softly. "You refused drugs, said you needed to feel everything. I've never seen someone so stubborn." "I was terrified they'd somehow tainted the epidural, paranoid about everything after what Vincent said." Serafina watched Adrian examine a particularly vibrant maple leaf. "The moment they placed him in my arms, so perfect, so healthy, I'd never felt relief like that." "I ran every test imaginable," Kaya admitted, "checked his DNA against markers from the Prometheus trials. When everything came back normal, I cried in my office for an hour." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by Adrian's delighted exclamation as he discovered a leaf bigger than his head. Then Kaya spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "Malric came to see me this morning, showed me everything they found in the archives. Decades of covered-up trials, buried evidence. He's turning it all over to the Justice Department." "I know." Serafina's voice was quiet. He's dismantling everything he spent his life building. No, Kaya corrected gently. He's dismantling everything that kept him from what really matters. You should have seen his face when I showed him Adrian's baby pictures, like a man seeing color for the first time. Mom! Dr. Kaya! Adrian's excited voice interrupted them. He ran over, carefully cradling something in his small hands. Look what I found! The pigments in this leaf are changing because the chlorophyll is breaking down, revealing the carotenoids underneath. It's like nature's own chemical reaction. Kaya watched Serafina explain the science of autumn colors to her enraptured son, his grey eyes, Malric's eyes, wide with wonder. In that moment, she saw what she'd been protecting all these years. Not just a mother and child, but the pure joy of discovery untainted by greed or corruption. Her phone buzzed with a text from Malric. Federal agents just left. Vincent's been arrested. It's starting. Another message followed quickly. Thank you. For protecting them when I couldn't. For giving me the chance to make this right. Kaya looked at Adrian, now thoroughly engaged in categorizing his leaf collection by scientific name. Serafina gently correcting his Latin pronunciation. She thought of that little girl in Boston, of all the children who'd suffered in silence while powerful men counted profits. He's going to need both of you, she typed back to Malric. The storm that's coming, it will touch everything. Adrian deserves to know his father fought for what's right, no matter the cost. The reply came swiftly. Will you help me? Help us become the kind of family he deserves. Kaya smiled, watching Adrian tear across the garden after another perfect leaf, his laughter echoing off hospital walls that had seen too much sorrow. Always, she replied. Some promises are worth keeping forever. Rain clouds gathered above Manhattan's towers, but here in this garden, watching a little boy explore the mysteries of changing seasons, Kaya felt nothing but sunshine. She'd spent 5 years helping build a fortress around this precious family. Now, perhaps, it was time to help build bridges instead. Mom, Adrian called out, can we show Dad my leaf collection tomorrow? Dr. Kaya says he likes science too. Serafina's eyes met Kaya's, full of questions and hope and fear. Kaya nodded encouragingly. Sometimes the greatest acts of protection weren't about building walls, but about having the courage to take them down. Yes, sweetheart, Serafina called back, her voice steady. I think Dad would love that very much. And in the gathering dusk of an autumn evening, surrounded by falling leaves and rising hopes, Kaya watched the fortress walls begin to crumble, making way for something stronger to grow in their place. Something built not of fear and secrets, but of truth and trust and second chances. After all, she thought, watching Adrian race back with another treasure, sometimes the most powerful protection of all was simply allowing love to bloom in its own time, like flowers pushing through concrete, reaching always toward the light. Chapter 7. A Father's Awakening. The hospital cafeteria wasn't where Malric had imagined having his first real conversation with his son, yet here he sat, his Italian wool suit jacket draped over a plastic chair, watching Adrian methodically dissect his chocolate pudding with a spoon. The boy treated it like a science experiment, creating perfect concentric circles with the precision of a miniature engineer. Mum says, when particles spin in circles, they make magnetic fields, Adrian announced, not looking up from his work. Is that why the pudding makes patterns when you stir it? Malric's throat tightened. Of course his son would see quantum physics in dessert. That's more about fluid dynamics, he answered carefully. When you stir the pudding, you're creating what's called a vortex. It's similar to what happens when you drain a bathtub. Adrian's eyes, so achingly familiar, lit up. Like the Coriolis effect. Mum showed me videos of water spinning different directions at the equator. Did you know that's mostly a myth? The force is too weak to affect small amounts of water. People just see what they expect to see. People often do. Malric agreed softly, thinking of all the warnings he'd been too blind to notice 5 years ago. Sometimes the hardest part of science is learning to see what's really there, not what we want to be there. That's why we have to do experiments. Adrian dunked a strawberry into his carefully crafted pudding spiral. Mum says the scientific method is like a superpower. It helps us find truth, even when it's hiding. The simple wisdom in those words struck deeper than any corporate presentation Malric had ever heard. He watched his son's precise movements, recognizing his own methodical nature, tempered by Serafina's creative spark. "What's your favorite kind of experiment?" he asked, genuinely curious about the workings of this brilliant young mind. Adrian's face lit up with an enthusiasm that transformed him. "Right now I'm studying crystallization. Mum helped me grow copper sulfate crystals. They're this amazing blue color, like your tie was yesterday. But the really cool part is how the molecules align themselves perfectly every time, like they're following invisible instructions written in mathematics." He launched into an explanation of supersaturated solutions and nucleation points that would have impressed graduate students. Malric found himself leaning forward, drawn into his son's infectious excitement. This wasn't just memorized facts. Adrian understood the underlying principles, made connections that showed true comprehension. "And did you know," Adrian continued, barely pausing for breath, "that some crystals are piezoelectric? That means they make electricity when you squeeze them, like in watch batteries and guitar pickups and—" He stopped suddenly, a shadow crossing his face. "Sorry, Mom says sometimes I talk too much about science, that not everyone wants to hear all the details." "Hey." Malric's voice was gentle but firm. "I want to hear everything. Every detail, every theory, every question you have." He hesitated, then added softly, "When I was your age, I used to drive my grandfather crazy with questions about how things worked. He bought me my first microscope for my 5th birthday." Adrian's eyes widened. "Really? What did you look at first?" "Everything I could find. Leaves, insects, water from the pond behind our house." A long-forgotten memory surfaced. "I once spent an entire Saturday studying the crystalline structure of salt after it dried on a microscope slide. That's like my snowflake project." Adrian bounced in his seat. "Did you know each snowflake is unique because it records the exact temperature and humidity changes it encounters while falling? It's like they're keeping a diary in ice." Malric smiled, recognizing Serafina's poetic way of explaining scientific concepts. "The technical term for that is environmental morphology. But I like your description better." A comfortable silence fell as Adrian returned to his pudding exploration. Malric watched him work, noting how his son's small fingers moved with the same precise control he used in the lab, the same focus Serafina brought to her research. "Mum keeps a picture of you," Adrian said suddenly, his voice quieter, "in her special box with my baby stuff. She looks at it sometimes when she thinks I'm sleeping." He glanced up, those grey eyes suddenly serious. "She cries sometimes too, but not sad crying, I think. More like missing crying." The simple observation cut through all Malric's corporate armor, reaching the heart he'd forgotten he had. "Adrian." He struggled to find words worthy of this moment. There are some mistakes adults make that take a long time to fix. But that doesn't mean we stop trying to fix them. "Like when my crystal-growing solution got contaminated," Adrian offered. "I had to start over, but Mom said failures are just data points helping us find the right path." A laugh that was almost a sob escaped Malric. Of course Serafina would turn even failure into a lesson about resilience. "Your mom is very wise. She says I have your smile." Adrian studied him carefully. "And your thinking face, when you're trying to solve a puzzle in your head. I can see it now, she's right." "You have her heart," Malric said softly. Her way of seeing beauty in how things work. That's worth more than any smile. Adrian considered this, head tilted in a gesture so like Serafina it made Malric's chest ache. Doctor, Kaya says hearts are just specialized muscle cells working together to create something bigger than themselves. Maybe that's what families are too. The profound simplicity of the comparison stunned Malric. While he'd been moving corporate pieces on a global chessboard, his son had been quietly developing wisdom beyond his years. That's exactly what families should be. Then maybe... Adrian poked at his remaining pudding, suddenly shy. Maybe we could do experiments together sometimes? Mom says the best scientific discoveries happen when different minds work together. Malric had negotiated billion-dollar deals without flinching, but this simple request from a 4-year-old nearly undid him. I would love that, more than anything, he managed, his voice rough with emotion. Cool. Adrian's face brightened. Because I've been thinking about testing different catalysts for my crystal growing, and Mom says some of the chemicals I want to try are too advanced for home use, but maybe in a real lab. He launched into a detailed proposal that would have impressed any research committee, complete with hypotheses and control variables. Malric found himself taking mental notes, already planning how to convert one of the company's unused labs into a safe space for father-son experiments. A noise made them both look up. Serafina stood in the cafeteria doorway, her eyes suspiciously bright as she watched them. Behind her, Kaya wore a satisfied smile that suggested she'd orchestrated this entire meeting. "Mom!" Adrian called out. "Dad knows about crystal nucleation too, and he said we can do experiments together. Can we show him my snowflake research? Please?" The word Dad hit Malric like a physical force. He looked at Serafina, questioning, afraid he'd overstepped. But she was smiling through her tears, nodding in a way that spoke volumes about hope and healing and second chances. "Why don't we all go look at them together?" she suggested, moving to join them. "I think there's still some hot chocolate in the doctor's lounge, and Adrian can explain his hypothesis about dendritic crystal formation." As they walked through the hospital corridors, Adrian between them chattering excitedly about supersaturation rates, Malric felt something shift in his universe. The empire he'd built might be crumbling, his reputation in tatters as the investigation into Vincent widened. But here, in this moment, listening to his son explain the mathematics of snowflakes, he felt richer than he'd ever been. They were an unlikely family, a fallen CEO, a brilliant researcher who'd sacrificed everything for truth, and a 4-year-old who saw quantum physics in pudding cups. But maybe Adrian was right. Maybe they were just specialized cells, learning to work together, creating something bigger and more beautiful than themselves. And maybe, Malric thought as Adrian's small hand slipped trustingly into his, that was the greatest experiment of all. Chapter 8. Battle Lines. Lightning split the Manhattan skyline as Adrian huddled in Kaya's office, his small hands steady despite the storm as he worked on his latest crystal experiment. "The molecular structure becomes stronger under pressure," he explained to Tesla, his faithful penguin watching from a safe distance. "Like how diamonds form deep underground where it's scary and dark." He didn't know that 3 floors below, his father was facing a different kind of pressure. The hospital boardroom had become a battlefield, with Vincent Stone leading an army of lawyers and board members against the Lucian legacy. "Your father built this company on trust," Vincent's voice cut through the tension. "And you're destroying it over what? A woman who abandoned you? A child who—" "Choose your next words very carefully." Malric's voice held the kind of cold fury that made even hardened executives step back. "That woman is the brilliant scientist who discovered your crimes. That child is my son, who shows more integrity in his crystal experiments than you've shown in decades of corruption. The storm outside intensified, matching the atmosphere within. Serafina stood beside Malric, her research data projected on screens around them. Evidence of buried trials, falsified, results, lives destroyed by corporate greed. You think this is just about profits? Vincent sneered. We're reshaping human evolution. Those trials, those failures you're so concerned about, they're stepping stones to the future. A few broken genes, a few lost children, acceptable losses for progress. The words hung in the air like poison. Then a small voice cut through the silence. That's not how science works. Adrian stood in the doorway, Kaya behind him with protective hands on his shoulders. His grey eyes, Malric's eyes, blazed with an intelligence beyond his years. Real science helps people, he continued, clutching his notebook of crystal diagrams. When my crystals don't grow right, I don't hide the results. I learn from them. That's what Grandpa Thomas taught us, isn't it? Vincent's face contorted. This is absurd. We're taking business advice from a child now? No, Jessica Chen stepped forward, her silver hair gleaming in the stormlight. We're remembering our humanity from one... She placed a thick file on the table. Thomas Lucian's private records, including his investigation into Project Prometheus. The investigation you killed him to hide. The boardroom erupted. Vincent lunged for the file, but federal agents emerged from the shadows, badges glinting. Vincent Stone, Benjamin Hayes stepped forward. You're under arrest for corporate fraud, criminal negligence, and the murder of Thomas Lucien. As agents read Miranda rights, Vincent's mask finally cracked. You think this ends here? He snarled at Malric. Half the pharmaceutical industry runs on buried research. They'll destroy you for exposing this. Everything you've built was built on lies. Malric cut him off. He moved to Adrian, kneeling before his son. But we're building something new now, something stronger. Adrian's face lit up with understanding. Like my latest experiment. When you introduce impurities into a crystal matrix, it either breaks apart or becomes stronger by forming new bonds. The whole structure has to realign, but if the core elements are pure enough, the new formation becomes unbreakable. Serafina finished, joining them. She touched the crystal pendant Adrian had grown for her, copper sulfate blue, like Malric's favorite tie. Sometimes things have to break apart to rebuild properly. Vincent struggled as agents led him away. The board will never support this madness. Your shareholders have already been informed. Kaya held up her tablet, displaying real-time stock updates. Seems the market responds well to ethical leadership and transparent research. Who knew? The remaining board members shifted uncomfortably until Jessica spoke again. Thomas Lucian believes science should serve humanity, not profit from its suffering. The evidence we've uncovered will shock the industry, yes. But from those ashes, we can rebuild something revolutionary. Like a phoenix, Adrian's eyes shone. We learned about them in mythology. They rise from ashes stronger than before, just like how some crystal structures can actually rebuild themselves after being damaged. Thunder crashed outside, but Adrian didn't flinch. He was too busy pulling something from his notebook, detailed drawings of a new research facility design. I've been working on this, he explained shyly, a place where scientists can help people without being afraid, with special labs for children to learn too. The board members gathered around, drawn despite themselves to the pure vision of a child who saw science as it should be, a force for healing, not profit. The Thomas Lucian Center for Ethical Research. Malric read the careful title. Adrian, when did you... Emma helped me, Adrian admitted, referring to his young friend from the oncology ward. She said if she gets better, she wants to be a scientist too, to help other kids not be scared of medicine. Serafina's eyes filled with tears as she recognized elements of her own early research dreams in her son's designs. Malric squeezed her hand, both watching their boy explain complex laboratory setups with passionate gestures. "All in favor of approving the new research center," Jessica called formally, "and appointing Dr. Serafina Renzo as Chief Research Officer." The vote was unanimous. Even those who'd sided with Vincent couldn't resist the power of pure truth spoken by a child. As the storm outside began to clear, Adrian tugged his parents toward Kaya's office. "Come see what happened to my crystals during the lightning. The electrical charge created this amazing lattice pattern, like the whole structure evolved to handle the pressure. Mom, Dad, what if we could use this principle to—" Malric and Serafina exchanged glances over their son's excited chatter. In the wake of corporate warfare, their boy still saw beauty in molecular bonds, still believed in science's power to heal rather than harm. "One more thing," Malric said softly, stopping Adrian's rush to his experiment. He knelt again, pulling out a small box. "I was going to wait, but sometimes the moment chooses itself." He opened it to reveal a ring designed to match the crystal patterns in Adrian's research. "Serafina Renzo, will you help us build this new future? All of it, the research center, the ethical trials, our family." "The molecular bonds of love," Adrian whispered excitedly. "Say yes, Mom. My calculations show a 99.9% probability of optimal outcomes." Serafina laughed through her tears. "Only 99.9%. "Well, there's always a margin of error in scientific studies," Adrian explained seriously. "But in this case—" He pulled out his crystal pendant, holding it up to catch the emerging sunlight. "Some structures are meant to be permanent." As Serafina's yes filled the room with joy, as Adrian excitedly began planning crystal decorations for the wedding, as Kaya and Jessica shared knowing smiles, a new day dawned over Manhattan. The storm had passed, leaving behind not destruction, but the foundation for something stronger. In the end, it took a child's wisdom to show them all what Vincent had forgotten. That true power lay not in profits or control, but in the pure heart of discovery, in the courage to face truth, and in the love that, like the strongest crystal matrix, could reshape itself under pressure into something unbreakable. And in Kaya's office, surrounded by family and friends, Adrian's crystals caught the morning light, scattering rainbows across smiling faces, nature's own celebration of bonds that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger, purer, ready to change the world one ethical experiment at a time. Chapter 9. Shattered Empire. The Lucian Towers boardroom had always felt like a gladiator's arena, with its soaring windows and imposing mahogany table. But today, as morning light painted Manhattan's skyline in shades of fire, the battle lines were drawn more clearly than ever before. Vincent Stone sat at the head of the table, radiating the casual arrogance of a man who'd never lost a corporate war. The emergency board meeting had drawn every major player in the company's hierarchy, their faces a mix of concern and calculation as they watched their world teeter on the edge of change. "I think we can all agree," Vincent was saying, his silver hair catching the light like a crown, "that recent events have raised serious questions about Malric's stability, his obsession with decades-old research data, his reckless accusations." The boardroom doors swung open. Malric entered first, followed by Serafina, Kaya, and Jessica Chen. But it was the final figure that made Vincent's practiced smile falter, Benjamin Hayes, leading a team of federal agents. "Actually," Malric's voice cut through the tension like a blade, "I think it's time we discussed your definition of reckless, Vincent." He nodded to Jessica, who began distributing thick folders to each board member. "Inside, you'll find complete documentation of Project Prometheus, including the real trial data that was buried. The shell companies used to hide unauthorized testing, the deaths that were carefully disguised as accidents." "This is absurd," Vincent scoffed, but his hand trembled slightly as he opened his folder. "These documents are clearly fabricated." "Are they?" Serafina stepped forward, her amber eyes blazing. "Like the evidence you fabricated to force my resignation? The threats against my unborn child?" Murmurs rippled through the board members as they read. Kaya moved to the presentation screen, bringing up medical records and photographs that made several people gasp. 17 children with confirmed genetic damage from the official trials, she stated clinically. But the unofficial tests. We've identified 43 families so far, across 3 continents. Children born with devastating mutations because their parents were unknowingly exposed to unstable compounds. "All to rush an untested drug to market," Malric added, his voice tight with controlled rage, "to beat competitors to patents worth billions. How many lives was each percentage point of profit worth, Vincent?" Vincent's mask of control cracked slightly. "You're destroying everything your grandfather built." "No." Jessica Chen's quiet voice carried unexpected authority. "I served Thomas Lucien for 40 years. He knew what you'd done, Vincent. He was gathering evidence to expose you when he died." She pulled out a final document, a handwritten letter. "Or should we say, when you visited him alone in that hospital room?" The color drained from Vincent's face. Several board members shifted away from him, the implications sinking in. "Federal agents are currently executing search warrants at every facility connected to Project Prometheus," Benjamin Hayes announced, "including your private estate, Mr. Stone. The servers we seized this morning have been illuminating." Vincent surged to his feet. "This is a coup, a desperate attempt by a lovesick fool to impress his former mistress. That mistress is my son's mother." Malric's voice could have frozen hell. "The brilliant scientist who discovered your crimes and chose protecting our child over her career. And she's also my fiancée, so I suggest you choose your next words very carefully." "Your son." One of the older board members looked up sharply. "The boy is yours." "Adrian Thomas Lucien," Serafina confirmed softly, "named for his grandfather, who taught his father that real legacy isn't measured in stock prices." "A grandson." The board member turned to Vincent, decades of friendship crumbling. "You threatened a Lucien heir, buried evidence that could have affected his health?" "I protected this company," Vincent snarled, his composure finally shattering. "While you all grew soft, worrying about ethics and safety protocols, I kept us on top. Those families knew the risks, did they?" Kaya's voice cut like ice, "like that 7-year-old in Boston knew the risks, the one who died screaming while your people falsified her charts." The boardroom erupted in chaos. Vincent lunged for his phone, but federal agents were faster. As they read him his rights, his face contorted with desperate fury. "You think this ends with me?" He spat at Malric. "Half the pharmaceutical industry runs on buried trials. They'll destroy you for exposing this. Everything you've built, everything you are, is standing right here," Malric finished, taking Serafina's hand. "The empire you built on lies is falling, Vincent, but something stronger will rise from its ashes." As agents led Vincent away, Malric addressed the stunned board. "My grandfather believed science should serve humanity, not profit from its suffering. I've forgotten that recently, lost in the same obsession with power that corrupted Vincent. But watching my son explore the pure joy of discovery, seeing his brilliant mind work without agenda or greed." He squeezed Serafina's hand. "It's time to rebuild Lucien Pharmaceuticals on a foundation of truth." "The restructuring will be extensive," Serafina added, her researcher's mind already mapping possibilities. "Complete transparency in trials, ethical oversight beyond industry standards, real investment in rare disease research, even when profits are uncertain." "You'll lose billions," someone protested. "We'll save lives," Malric corrected. including children who deserve the same chance my son has to grow up healthy, to pursue science with pure hearts, to change the world without destroying it. The vote that followed was unanimous. Vincent's allies, faced with federal indictments, crumbled quickly. By noon, Malric was formally reinstated as CEO, with Serafina appointed as Chief Research Officer and a new board ethics committee headed by Kaya Morrison. But it was the scene in Kaya's office later that truly marked the day's victory. Adrian sat surrounded by his beloved crystals, explaining complex molecular structures to his parents with infectious enthusiasm. His latest experiment, copper sulfate crystals the exact blue of his father's favorite tie, caught the afternoon light, scattering fragments of rainbow across laughing faces. "The molecular bonds are perfectly aligned now," he announced proudly, unknowingly echoing his father's words from days before. "Just like us." Serafina's engagement ring, a simple band chosen for its molecular symmetry rather than its price, caught the same light. Kaya watched from her doorway as this family, once shattered by secrets, grew stronger through the very forces meant to break them. Outside, federal agents continued gathering evidence of Vincent's crimes. Headlines would soon rock the pharmaceutical industry, exposing decades of buried truths. But here in this quiet room, watching Adrian's face light up as he shared his passion for science with parents who finally understood what really mattered, a different kind of headline was being written. Not in newspapers or stock reports, but in the unshakable bonds between three hearts who had found their perfect alignment, their true form, their strongest possible structure. Like the crystals Adrian loved, they had emerged from chaos into order, from darkness into light, from broken pieces into something beautiful and unbreakable. The empire of lies had fallen. But this, Malric thought as he watched his son's eyes shine with the pure joy of discovery, this was what winning really meant. Chapter 10. Healing Hearts. The morning sun painted Malric's penthouse in shades of gold, but it wasn't the spectacular view that held his attention. It was the sound of laughter floating from his newly converted home laboratory, where Adrian was attempting to explain quantum entanglement to his stuffed penguin Tesla. "You see, Tesla," Adrian's serious voice carried through the open door, "when particles are entangled, they're connected no matter how far apart they are. Like how Mom and Dad found each other again, even after being separated by time and space." Malric paused in the doorway, his heart clenching at his son's innocent analogy. The lab had been his engagement gift to Serafina, a state-of-the-art space where their family could explore science together. The walls were lined with safety equipment sized for a 4-year-old scientist, and the center table held Adrian's growing crystal collection. "That's a remarkably accurate comparison," Serafina's voice came from behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, her engagement ring catching the morning light. "Though I think our reunion had more to do with a certain young physicist's gravitational pull." Adrian looked up from his experiment, his face brightening. "Dad, look what Mom helped me set up. We're studying how different wavelengths of light affect crystal growth rates. I hypothesize that blue light will create the most optimal conditions because—" He launched into a detailed explanation that would have impressed doctoral candidates. Malric found himself drawn into the room, captivated by his son's enthusiasm. The past month since Vincent's arrest had been a whirlwind of federal investigations and corporate restructuring, but these moments, these precious glimpses of pure scientific wonder, made everything worth it. "And Dr. Kaya says we can use the hospital spectrometer next week." Adrian bounced excitedly. "She says I'm the youngest researcher she's ever had in her lab." "Speaking of Kaya," Serafina smiled, "she's coming for dinner tonight. Says she has something important to discuss." The mention of their friend sobered Malric slightly. Kaya had been instrumental in the aftermath of Vincent's fall, helping identify and reach out to families affected by the buried trials. Her testimony had ensured Vincent and his conspirators would spend decades in prison. "Mom," Adrian's voice turned thoughtful, "can we invite Jessica too? She looks sad whenever she brings those old files to your office. Maybe she needs more friends, like how Tesla gets lonely when I'm at school." Serafina's eyes met Malric's over their son's head, sharing a moment of pride at their child's empathy. Jessica Chen had become a grandmother figure to Adrian, delighting in his curious mind and sharing stories about his grandfather's early scientific adventures. "That's very thoughtful, buddy," Malric said. "Actually, I have something to ask both of you about Jessica. The board has created a new position, Chief Ethics Officer. Someone to ensure we never lose sight of what matters most in our research. I was thinking of offering it to her." "Like a scientific conscience?" Adrian's eyes lit up. "Making sure we use knowledge for good things, not bad things?" "Exactly like that." Malric knelt beside his son's workspace, examining the crystal experiment. "Your grandfather believed science should help people, not hurt them. Jessica helped preserve his values all these years. Now she can help us rebuild the company the right way. With proper molecular alignment," Adrian nodded sagely, making both his parents laugh. A gentle chime interrupted them, the breakfast timer Serafina had instituted to ensure they didn't get too lost in experiments. "Time for pancakes," Adrian announced. "Can we make them in molecular shapes again?" As they moved to the kitchen, Malric caught Serafina's hand, pulling her close. "I never thought I could have this," he admitted softly. "Science and family and love, all perfectly aligned. Like quantum entanglement?" she teased, but her eyes were serious. "You know, he asks about the trial families every day. Wants to know if the new medicines we're developing will help their children." "He has your heart," Malric murmured, "seeing beyond the equations to the human impact. And your determination to make things right." She touched his face gently. "The Foundation's pediatric research grants are going to change lives, Malric. Proper funding for rare disease studies, support for affected families." "Dad," Adrian called from the kitchen, "can we make the pancakes look like copper sulfate crystals? I want to show Tesla how molecular structure affects crystal habit." "Coming, buddy." Malric pressed a quick kiss to Serafina's temple. "Duty calls. Our young scientist needs his breakfast lecture on crystallography." They found Adrian already setting up his laboratory equipment, mixing bowls and measuring cups arranged with scientific precision. His notebook lay open beside him, filled with surprisingly accurate drawings of crystal structures. "Mom, did you know that some crystals can heal themselves?" he asked, as she helped him measure flour. "If you scratch them, they can reorganize their molecules to fix the damage. Isn't that amazing?" "Like families," Malric said quietly, watching his son and fiancée work in perfect synchronization. "Sometimes they need to break apart before they can rebuild themselves stronger." Adrian considered this with his usual thoughtful expression. "Is that why you and Mom were separated, so you could realign your molecular bonds properly?" The profound innocence of the question brought tears to Serafina's eyes. She pulled their son close, breathing in the scent of his dark curls. "Something like that, sweetheart. Sometimes love needs time to find its perfect crystal structure." "Well, I'm glad you did," Adrian declared, returning to his pancake preparations, "because now we can all do science together, and Tesla says 3 scientists are better than 2, especially when making molecular pancakes." Malric watched his family, the brilliant woman who'd sacrificed everything for truth, and the extraordinary child who saw the world through eyes of wonder. The empire he'd once prized seemed insignificant compared to this, a Sunday morning filled with laughter and love and scientific exploration. Outside, Manhattan glittered in the autumn sun, but the real gold was here in this kitchen, in a little boy's joy as he created edible crystal structures, in a mother's patience as she explained molecular geometry using chocolate chips, in a father's growing understanding that true power lay not in boardrooms or bank accounts, but in moments like these. Like the self-healing crystals Adrian loved, they had emerged from darkness stronger, more perfectly aligned. Their bonds, once broken by fear and ambition, had reformed into something unbreakable, a family built on love, truth, and the pure wonder of scientific discovery. And that, Malric thought as he helped his son arrange blueberries in a precise hexagonal pattern, was the most beautiful experiment of all. Chapter 11. New Foundations. Kaya Morrison stood in her hospital office, surrounded by the photographs that marked her journey. Smiling children who'd beaten impossible odds, families who'd found hope in darkness. But it was the newest addition that kept drawing her eye. Adrian asleep in the research library, curled up in Malric's lap, while Serafina explained a complex equation on the whiteboard behind them. The image captured everything she'd fought to protect for 5 years, everything she'd dared to hope might be possible. And now, watching through her office window as Adrian conducted his official research in the children's ward, she saw those hopes blooming into reality. Her young assistant scientist had transformed the ward's play area into what he called his secondary laboratory. Currently, he was teaching a group of young patients about crystal formation, his beloved penguin Tesla propped up as a distinguished observer. The children were entranced, their own battles temporarily forgotten as they watched sugar crystals grow on cotton strings. "And see, the molecules align themselves perfectly," Adrian explained, gesturing with the authority of a tiny professor. "Just like how our bodies can heal when we give them the right medicine and lots of love. Right, Dr. Kaya?" She smiled, remembering a similar conversation with a terrified Serafina 5 years ago, trying to convince her that running was the only way to protect her unborn child. Now that same child was spreading hope in the very halls where his mother had hidden. "Absolutely right, Doctor. Adrian," she called back, making him beam with pride at the title. The elevator chimed, and Serafina emerged carrying 2 coffee cups and a familiar blue folder. "Thought you might need reinforcements. The board approved everything. Full funding for the Pediatric Research Center, scholarships for affected families, worldwide outreach programs." Kaya accepted the coffee gratefully. "And the special project? Breaking ground next month?" Serafina's eyes sparkled. "The Thomas Lucien Center for Ethical Research. State-of-the-art facilities dedicated to rare disease treatment, with housing for families during clinical trials. Jessica's already drafting governance protocols that would make Fort Knox look relaxed." They watched Adrian demonstrate proper safety goggle technique to his rapt audience, his small face serious as he adjusted each pair perfectly. One little girl, Emma, barely 4 and fighting leukemia, looked at him with unveiled adoration. "He asked me to help him design special crystal experiments for the oncology ward," Serafina said softly. "Said if the patients could grow something beautiful while they're healing, it might help them remember that good things take time." Kaya's throat tightened. Like father, like son. Malric's been here every evening this week, reading research papers to the long-term patients. Yesterday, I caught him explaining molecular biology using superhero analogies. "He's trying to make up for lost time," Serafina nodded. "Not just with Adrian, but with his grandfather's legacy. The real one, not the empire Vincent corrupted." A commotion at the ward entrance drew their attention. Malric arrived with his arms full of specialized lab equipment, followed by Jessica Chen carrying what appeared to be a professional-grade microscope. "Dad!" Adrian's excited voice carried across the ward. "Did you bring the polarized light filters? Emma wants to see how crystals bend rainbow patterns." "Of course, buddy. And look who else came to join the research team." Jessica set up the microscope with practiced ease, her usual formality softening as Adrian introduced her to his junior scientists. She'd taken to her new role as chief ethics officer with passionate dedication. But these moments, teaching children about the pure joy of discovery, seemed to heal something long broken in her. "The board's announcing the new research initiatives tomorrow," Serafina murmured. Vincent's old allies are furious about the profit margins, but they're too terrified of public opinion to object. Amazing what a little truth can do. "Truth and love," Kaya corrected, watching Malric help Emma adjust her safety goggles, while Adrian explained crystal nucleation to Jessica with elaborate hand gestures. Those children he hurt, the families Vincent's greed destroyed, they're finally getting justice, but more importantly, they're getting hope. A small voice interrupted them. "Dr. Kaya, can you help us calculate the optimal supersaturation ratio? Dad says you're the best at solution chemistry." Kaya found herself drawn into Adrian's experiment, helping tiny hands measure precise amounts of copper sulfate. She watched Emma's face light up as blue crystals began forming, saw how Adrian's patient explanations gave the sick children something to focus on beyond their pain. This was healing in its purest form, not just bodies, but spirits. The ward that had once felt heavy with fear now rang with scientific questions and childish laughter. Even the parents watching from the doorway seemed lighter, hope kindling in their eyes as they watched their children engage with the mysteries of crystal growth. "Mom!" Adrian called out. "Come see what Emma discovered." The crystal structure changed when we adjusted the pH. It's like the molecules are dancing. Serafina joined them at the makeshift lab station, her researcher's mind engaging immediately with Emma's observation. Soon they were all absorbed in the impromptu experiment, world-class scientists and young patients working together to understand nature's hidden patterns. Malric caught Kaya's eye over the happy chaos, his expression full of gratitude. She nodded slightly, remembering late-night phone calls and desperate plans, the weight of secrets carried through 5 long years. Worth it. Every moment of fear, every difficult choice had led to this. Later, as the sun set over Manhattan, Kaya added another photograph to her wall. Adrian and Emma bent over their crystal garden, young faces alight with discovery. Behind them, their families watched with matching expressions of joy. Parents and doctors, scientists and children, all connected by the simple wonder of knowledge shared with love. The image captured everything she'd dreamed of that night. Serafina appeared at her door. Healing that went beyond medicine, truth that transcended fear, love that grew stronger through every trial. Like the crystals her young friend loved so much, these bonds had formed slowly, perfectly, creating something more beautiful than anyone could have planned. "Dr. Kaya." Adrian's voice was sleepy as Malric prepared to take him home. "Can we do more experiments tomorrow? Emma says the crystals help her feel better." "Of course, little scientist." She hugged him close, breathing in the scent of copper sulfate and childhood dreams. Some experiments are too important to ever stop. And watching the family leave together, Adrian between his parents, Jessica following with an armful of research notes, the future stretching bright before them, Kaya knew that the greatest experiment of all was simply this. Love, given time and proper conditions, could crystallize into something unshakable, something that not even the darkest forces could break. After all, she thought, straightening Emma's carefully labeled crystal samples, the best scientific discoveries always came from hearts brave enough to search for truth, minds wise enough to learn from failure, and souls patient enough to wait for beauty to grow in its own perfect time. Chapter 12. Full Circle, A Love Crystallized Dawn, painted the Mount Sinai Hospital garden in hues of rose gold, light dancing through thousands of hand-grown crystals suspended from cherry blossom branches. Each prism had been carefully crafted in Adrian's laboratory over the past 6 months, his Project Forever, as he'd named it. The crystals formed an intricate canopy above the wedding guests, creating a ceiling of rainbow light that seemed to dance with each spring breeze. "The geometry of love," Adrian explained to Emma, as they made final adjustments to their crystal arrangements. She stood beside him now, her oncology treatments complete, her recovery a testament to the new protocols developed at the Thomas Lucian Center for Ethical Research. Each crystal structure reflects a different moment in Mom and Dad's story. He pointed to a particularly complex formation. "See, this one shows the exact molecular pattern that was present in Dad's tie the day they reunited. And these," he gestured to a series of blue copper sulfate crystals, "represent every experiment we've done together as a family since then." In the bride's preparation room, Serafina stood before a full-length mirror, her wedding gown a masterpiece of science and artistry. The fabric seemed to shimmer with embedded microcrystals, each one grown by Adrian and Emma in a pattern that mimicked the molecular structure of serotonin, the chemistry of happiness, as Adrian had explained. Her copper curls were crowned with a tiara that combined crystal formations representing key elements: copper for beauty, carbon for strength, gold for endurance. "Something old," Kaya said softly, fastening a delicate necklace around Serafina's throat, the first successful crystal she and Adrian had grown together during those dark days of separation. "Something new." She touched the slight swell of Serafina's stomach, where the newest Lucian scientist was already growing. "Something borrowed." She adjusted the crystal-studded veil Jessica Chen had worn at her own wedding decades ago. "And something perfectly molecularly blue." She smiled at the bouquet of copper sulfate crystals Adrian had insisted on including. Meanwhile, in the garden, Malric knelt beside his son's newest experiment. Adrian had set up a special crystallization chamber beside the altar, where two perfect structures were slowly growing together, their lattices intertwining in real time. "The crystals will complete their fusion exactly during the vows," Adrian explained proudly, adjusting instruments with precise care. "Because even in chemistry, timing is everything for a perfect reaction." He wore a miniature version of his father's tuxedo with special modifications. His bow tie featured a pattern of glow-in-the-dark molecular structures, and his pocket square was actually a silk-printed image of his first successful crystal experiment. Tesla, his faithful penguin, sported matching attire and held an important position as chief of crystal security. The garden filled with an extraordinary gathering. Young patients from the oncology ward, now recovering thanks to the center's breakthrough treatments, sat beside corporate executives who'd chosen ethics over easy profits. Research scientists mingled with federal agents who'd helped bring down Vincent's empire. Jessica Chen, elegant in blue crystal jewelry Adrian had designed, greeted Thomas Lucian's old colleagues, those who'd helped preserve his true legacy. Emma, radiant in her junior bridesmaid dress, supervised a group of young patients who'd helped create crystal decorations during their treatments. "Science is more beautiful when we work together," she declared, echoing Adrian's frequent wisdom. Each child wore a crystal pendant matching their specific research contribution, a rainbow army of young scientists carrying forward a legacy of ethical discovery. As the ceremony began, Adrian stood proudly between his parents, his role far more than simple ring-bearer. The rings themselves were his masterpiece, grown within crystals that had been carefully dissolved to reveal bands of precious metal imprinted with the exact molecular pattern present in the hospital air the day his parents reunited. "Before we begin," Kaya announced as officiant, "our young doctor Lucien has prepared a special demonstration of chemical love." Adrian stepped forward, his small face serious with concentration. The crystallization chamber beside the altar had been timed perfectly. As he spoke, two separate crystal structures slowly grew toward each other, their molecular lattices reaching out like lovers' hands across a microscopic divide. In nature, Adrian explained to the captivated audience, some molecules are drawn together by forces we can't see but can measure in their effects. Like how Mom and Dad found each other again, drawn by bonds that never really broke. He adjusted a dial, and the crystals began to glow softly. When they finally meet, the crystal lattices touched and intertwined, forming a structure more beautiful than either could have achieved alone. Gasps of wonder rippled through the crowd. "That's the real chemistry of love," Adrian declared. "Separate elements combining to create something entirely new, stronger than its individual parts. Just like our family." The vows that followed were uniquely their own. Malric and Serafina exchanged not just rings, but small vials of their first shared crystal experiment. Their promises wove together science and love, hypothesis and heart, data and dreams. "I promise to be your constant in every experiment," Malric vowed, his voice thick with emotion. "To face every variable by your side, to measure our love not in profits or patents, but in moments of wonder shared with our children." "I promise to trust in our bond," Serafina responded, tears catching rainbow light. "To remember that even when paths diverge, true connections remain unbroken at the molecular level. To build our future on a foundation of truth, strengthened by every challenge we face together." Adrian's contribution came next, a carefully prepared solution that, when poured over their joined hands, crystallized instantly into a delicate lattice pattern. "Now you're officially bonded," he announced proudly, "both chemically and matrimonially." The garden erupted in laughter and applause. As Malric kissed his bride, Adrian activated his final surprise. The thousands of suspended crystals shifted in a choreographed dance of light, creating a double helix pattern that spiraled around the newlyweds, the DNA of their love made visible in rainbow light. The reception that followed was a celebration of science's pure joy. The cake, designed to Adrian's exacting specifications, featured edible crystal formations that changed color with temperature. Each table centerpiece told part of their story through crystal arrangements. The blue tie that started everything, the first experiment Adrian and Malric shared, the moment they discovered the new baby was coming. Emma presented her own gift, a crystal garden she'd grown during her treatment, each formation representing a different type of love, family, friendship, healing, hope. "Because everything beautiful starts with a single moment of clarity," she said, echoing Adrian's teachings. As evening fell, the crystal canopy began to glow with bioluminescent compounds Adrian had carefully cultivated. Under this ceiling of living light, he led his parents to the dance floor for a special moment. "I have an announcement," he said, his voice carrying clearly. "My latest experiments confirm something extraordinary." He placed a hand on Serafina's stomach. "The new baby? It's a girl. A little sister who already shows signs of crystal-compatible DNA." Joy rippled through the gathering. Malric lifted his son high, spinning him under the rainbow lights. "How did you figure that out, Professor Lucien?" "Simple chemical analysis," Adrian grinned. "Plus, I saw the ultrasound pictures in Mum's purse. But mostly science." As laughter and love filled the garden, Kaya watched her favorite family dance beneath the crystal sky. She thought of that night 5 years ago when a terrified Serafina appeared at her door. Who could have known that from such fear would grow such beauty? That a little boy's love of crystals would help heal not just his family, but an entire community. The evening ended with one final experiment. Adrian distributed special crystal seeds to each guest, and together they planted a garden of future wonder, each crystal programmed to grow into a unique formation over the coming months. A living reminder that love, like science, was an ongoing experiment in hope. Under a canopy of rainbow light, surrounded by the family they'd built from broken pieces, Malric and Serafina held their son close. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries, new wonders to explore. But tonight, in this garden where their story began, they were simply three hearts beating in perfect synchronization, a family bonded by love stronger than any molecular force, proven by time, tested by trials, and made more beautiful by every storm they'd weathered together. And somewhere, in the infinite dance of atoms that made up their world, the universe itself seemed to smile. For in this garden of crystal dreams and rainbow promises, science and love had finally found their perfect formula. The unbreakable bonds of family crystallized into something eternally, impossibly beautiful. Subscribe if you liked.